In a quiet town, lost among dense forests, there was an abandoned hospital. Her abodes are entangled in dark and eerie legends that cause horror and awe among the locals. Stories about her are passed down from generation to generation, each time acquiring new details and supplemented by terrible details. People whispered to each other about the abandoned hospital, appealing to the forces of evil and the impurities that were in it. Tales of otherworldly phenomena, ghosts and ominous presences made the bravest people tremble with fear. However, among all these terrible stories, the legend of the grandmother who lived inside the abandoned hospital was considered the most sinister. According to legend, the grandmother was once a respected medical worker, but over time her mind gradually sank into madness. After her death, she was denied burial on consecrated ground, and her soul, filled with anger and revenge, remained imprisoned within the walls of an abandoned hospital. It was said that she wandered the corridors and chambers, looking for victims for her sinister visits. Fear and trembling entered the hearts of the inhabitants of this town, and everyone knew that it was better not to be tested and not to tempt fate by invading an abandoned hospital. But despite the warnings, curiosity and a thirst for adventure attracted brave explorers who dared to enter the dark embrace of this sinister place. A young couple, Emily and Jake, became such brave explorers. They heard many scary stories about the abandoned hospital, but decided to find out the truth, not believing in superstition and mysticism. It all started with the fact that they heard about a strange incident associated with this place. Last year, a group of teenagers gathered to spend the night in an abandoned hospital as part of their traditional ghost challenge. They wanted to check if ghosts and apparitions really exist. However, after that night, none of the teenagers returned. They just disappeared without a trace. Emily and Jake decide to solve the mystery of this disappearance. They inquired about the hospital and learned that it was built at the end of the 19th century and closed after a series of mysterious deaths. The legend said that at this time the grandmother nurse lived and worked in the hospital. She was known for her bizarre therapies and her reputation as the woman in black. Her sinister appearance has become an object of fear and awe for patients. There was a gloomy atmosphere inside the abandoned hospital. Everywhere were visible traces of desolation and destruction. The walls are shabby, the windows are broken, and the air is filled with the smell of rotting materials. Emily and Jake's every step was accompanied by a creak and rustle, as if the hospital itself had a sinister life of its own. They passed through dark corridors lit only by the faint light of their lanterns. Suddenly, they heard muffled footsteps and groans coming from somewhere far away. Goosebumps ran down their spines, and their hearts beat faster. They continued to move forward, peering into the darkness, hoping to see something that would explain all the mysteries. Suddenly, a silhouetted formation appeared in front of them, resembling a woman in a black dress. Emily and Jake were frozen in fear, unable to move. The shadow moved smoothly towards them, emitting a flickering light and emitting an inexpressible sound, reminiscent of a piercing scream. She was the ghost grandmother who still roamed these abandoned corridors looking for new victims. Emily and Jake scattered, their screams filling the air. They tried to get out of this nightmarish place, where every step could be the last. However, the sinister grandmother was adamant and relentless. She pursued them, picking dead spots, ready to steal their lives and turn eternity into a nightmare. Penetrating deeper into the labyrinths of the hospital, Emily and Jake realized that they had become part of this legend, that their every move, every breath could be their last. Fear seized them, squeezing their hearts and depriving them of strength. But they didn't give up. They had very little time to find a way out and avoid the terrible fate that threatened them in these dark walls of an abandoned hospital. One such brave explorer was a couple, Emily and Jake. They were adventurous and not afraid of scary stories. When they heard about the mysterious disappearance of a group of teenagers who decided to spend the night in an abandoned hospital, their curiosity was piqued. Emily and Jake launched an investigation into every detail of this mysterious incident. They immersed themselves in the history of the hospital and learned that it was the site of accidents and tragedies. According to local legends, this hospital was associated with dark experiments With flashlights, cameras, and recording devices, Emily and Jake made their way to the abandoned hospital. Approaching its gates, they felt that the air was filled with incomprehensible energy. Everything around seemed tense and disturbing. Covered with goosebumps, they overcame the threshold of an abandoned hospital and entered its gloomy corridors. Here they were enveloped in an atmosphere of thick silence and a strange coldness. As they stepped forward, their hearts beat faster and a mysterious energy floated in the air. Plunging deeper into the labyrinth of corridors, they noticed traces of destruction and desolation. The walls were shabby, the windows were broken, and the furniture was dilapidated. Everything around testified that there had been no human presence here for a long time. Suddenly, they heard muffled footsteps and indistinct rustles coming from somewhere in the distance. Goosebumps ran down their spines, and their hearts beat faster. They stopped moving, peering into the darkness, trying to see the source of these sounds. Suddenly, Emily's lantern went out, shrouding them in total darkness. Fear gripped Emily and Jake. They sensed that someone or something was in the room with them. All their senses were at the limit. They heard breathing and ominous rustles behind them. But in this darkness, they did not see anything that could explain what was happening. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared out of the darkness. She looked like a woman in a white dress covered in dust and out of shape. The face was completely distorted, devoid of human form and expression. It was a creature devoid of life, but retaining its terrible essence. Emily and Jake, terrified, tried to run away, but an invisible force held them in place. The creature began to slowly approach, emitting indistinct whispers and shrill sounds. Every muscle in them tensed, every breath was excruciating. At the last moment, when they were ready to accept their fate, the creature disappeared into the darkness. Emily and Jake were left alone in the abandoned hospital, but their lives were spared. It was a warning to them never to return to this accursed place. They realized that there were forces hidden here that surpassed their understanding, and continued research could cost them their lives. The inside of the abandoned hospital was cold and quiet. Emily and Jake, two rebellious adventurers, trod boldly through the lost corridors, feeling their own footsteps echo hollowly. The lamps flickered with an uncertain light, but everything around seemed plunged into gloomy darkness. With each step, the tension in their hearts increased. The ominous stories they heard about the abandoned hospital filled their souls with fear and trembling. They knew that something unknown and dangerous might be hiding in this place. But their curiosity overcame their fear, and they continued their difficult journey. As they approached the room where the sinister grandmother was rumored to live, the air was filled with the eerie smell of their terror. A vague sensation pervaded their bodies, causing them to tremble and feel wary. The door before them was closed, as if guarding the very secret of this dark legend. Emily and Jake's hearts raced as they decided to open the door and enter the inner world of the abandoned hospital. Having slightly opened it, they penetrated into a gloomy room, where time froze in its gloomy course. Old beds covered with dust, pieces of upholstery on the walls and mysterious shadows created an atmosphere of mysticism and suspense. It was at that moment that they sensed that something was amiss inside the room. The air thickened, as if an invisible weight had been heaped upon them. Their steps became heavy and unsteady. They turned around, expecting to see the ghostly grandmother, but all that was in front of them was a darkened window. Suddenly, startled with surprise, they heard rustling and crunching in the corner of the room. They took a breath and turned their gaze towards it. And there, in the gloomy shadows, they noticed the distorted face of the grandmother. She stood before them, dressed in rags, her eyes full of madness and anger. Fear gripped Emily and Jake. They felt that their grandmother did not wish them well. There was a ruthless desire to harm them in her eyes. But before they could react, Grandma vanished into the darkness, leaving only an eerie echo of her existence. However, this meeting changed everything. Emily and Jake realized that the legends about the abandoned hospital weren't just empty stories. This place held powers beyond their comprehension. They realized that their lives were now in danger and decided to leave this place before it was too late. Their hearts beat faster as they ran out of the abandoned hospital. They felt relieved, but their minds filled with indescribable horror from what they saw. They decided not to tell anyone about their adventure so as not to attract more people to this place of fear and mystery. However, each of them remained with the delusion that the grandmother was still sneaking into their dreams and watching them from the shadow world. Ever since Emily and Jake left the abandoned hospital, their lives have been a nightmare. Every night they woke up from nightmares in which the ghost grandmother haunted them, screaming their names and contorting her angry face. Each awakening left them sweaty and exhausted, with the feeling that their grandmother was still nearby, watching them from the shadow world. They decided to find a way to get rid of this nightmare and persecution. After several unsuccessful attempts, they turned to psychics and requests for help. Psychics claimed that the ghost grandmother was strongly attached to this place and that only a special ritual could help them break the connection between the grandmother and the abandoned hospital. Under the guidance of psychics, Emily and Jake returned to the abandoned hospital. In their hands were candles, aromatic herbs and ancient symbols that were supposed to help them in the ritual. They passed through the familiar corridors, feeling the cold seep into their bones and the atmosphere filling with sinister energy. When they reached the room where, according to legend, the grandmother lived, they lit candles and began to cast spells to summon the grandmother's soul. The air was filled with the scent of herbs, and the flames of the candles cast dancing shadows on the walls. Suddenly, something inexplicable happened in the room. There was an impenetrable silence, and then, out of the darkness, the silhouette of the grandmother appeared. She looked even more terrible than in the nightmares, with her distorted face and eyes filled with madness and malice. Emily and Jake stood in front of grandmother, talismans clutched in their hands, with unwavering resolve. They continued to cast spells, trying to penetrate the depths of her soul and persuade her to free herself from her evil form. Grandmother, at first resisting, gradually began to change her behavior. Her eyes lost their sinister luster, and her face began to express pain and sadness. Finally, the grandmother disappeared before their eyes, and the room was filled with calmness. Emily and Jake knew that they had successfully freed Grandma from her captivity in this place. They understood that they would never forget these terrible events, but now they had hope for a better future. After leaving the abandoned hospital, Emily and Jake felt that their lives were now under a different light. And although they can never forget the horrors they have experienced, they are ready to move forward, stronger and wiser, knowing that even in the darkest corners of the world there is a place for light and hope. After an encounter with a ghostly grandmother in an abandoned hospital, Emily and Jake felt some relief. The nightmares that haunted them every night became less frequent, and the terrible visions of their grandmother disappeared. They could finally find some peace. However, even after their victory over their grandmother, Emily and Jake still sensed something sinister lurking in the dark. They decided to look into the roots of this nightmare and find a way to finally get rid of it. While researching the history of the abandoned hospital, they discovered that it was built on land that was previously a site of powerful and ancient rituals. This explained the ghost grandmother's attachment to this place and the constant nightmares she inflicted on her victims. They decided to find hidden artifacts and sacred symbols associated with ancient rituals and use them to completely free themselves from nightmares. With the help of psychics and research, they found the place where these artifacts were kept. In the depths of the forest, in a remote clearing, stood an ancient temple, surrounded by a secret and mystical aura. Emily and Jake got inside, where they found sacred objects covered in dust and forgotten by time. Following the instructions of the psychics, they collected all the artifacts and began the ritual of release. Lights flared up around them, and the wind began to rustle, as if in accompaniment to their actions. They cast spells and prayers, directing their energy and hope for the final deliverance from nightmares. Suddenly, a bright flash of light surrounded them, and they felt all of the sinister energies disappear. Their bodies and souls felt relieved, as if they had finally cast off the oppression of past nightmares. Emily and Jake knew that they were able to overcome the nightmares and free themselves from the ghost grandmother. They were grateful for their strength, tenacity, and support for each other on this journey. Now they could live their lives without fear and the shadow of the past, looking to the future with optimism and hope.